Hello everyone, a very warm welcome to all of you. My name is Pratik and I'll be taking up the News Today discussion for 25th February. So the first main news is Supreme Court questions the effectiveness of the nota. So here we'll understand what exactly is the purpose of nota and why this question of effectiveness of nota has arisen in this case. We'll also understand what is the important observations that Supreme Court has recently made in this PIL. In the second news, blockchain-based digital governance have been given a major push. So we'll understand the whole idea behind what is blockchain-based digital governance, what is the significance, and what problems can it solve in the governance process. The third news is UN launches road safety financing project in 4 states of India. So we'll understand the major components of the scheme and we'll also understand why this measure is quite important and then what are the various components of this particular scheme. In the fourth news, we'll discuss Supreme Court shifts river pollution monitoring to NGT. So here we'll understand why this shift has happened and what exactly are the powers that are given to NGT within this. In the last news, we'll discuss LEGO India project. We'll understand the concept of the what exactly is the purpose of LEGO and what are the objectives behind this project. And then we also have some quick updates. So let us start with the very first news, that is Supreme Court questions the effectiveness of the nota option in elections. And this news is particularly relevant from the point of GS paper 2 Indian polity, where we have a very specific section from election, that is the salient features of the Representations of People's Act. Okay, so let's understand the context in which this news has emerged. So recently, a PIL was filed in the Supreme Court that questioned the whole efficacy, or it wanted to scrap the provision under Section 55, Clause 3, Section 55, Clause 3 of RPA 1951. Now, this PIL was moved by an NGO called Vidhi Center. And what was the intention behind this PIL? The intention was that as per this section, if there is an election that is being contested and there is only one candidate that is finally there with respect to a particular constituency, then that particular candidate is elected without having to go for election, which basically means that suppose there are 4 candidates per constituency and within them 3 of the candidates candidature has been cancelled because of several reasons. So if there is only one candidate that is remaining, then there will not be any election held. The candidate which has remained, his election will be certain without contesting the election. And this provision has been contested by the PIL by the Vidhi Center. Now, as you may be aware that there is also a provision of nota, that is none of the above option, right? So even if there is provision of only one candidate is contesting election, still the nota option should be there in the EVM. That is what the Vidhi Center has said. But Supreme Court has refrained from scrapping this provision, saying that it will lead to legislative vacuum. And Supreme Court has also made an observation that the nota provision that was enacted or that was given under a provision in 2013 has failed to perform its objective. And that is why we need to understand the whole idea behind nota and to what extent it has been able to perform its stated objective. Next, let's understand the whole concept and origin of nota. So Supreme Court has said that more than a decade after its introduction, so it was introduced when? It was introduced in 2013 in a very significant case called PUCL versus Union of India, where the Supreme Court had directed the Election Commission of India to include nota option in the EVMs. So earlier, if you did not want to select any of the or elect or choose for any of the candidate, you still have the option of not voting or registering that you are not opting to vote for any of the candidate. But earlier this was to be done under a very specific provision under section or rules 49O of conduct of election rules. Now, conduct of election rules essentially also are governed from the provision of how to conduct election, and Article 327 of the Constitution empowers the Parliament to enact laws to conduct elections. So, as per this law or as per this article, the Parliament of India has enacted several provisions such as Representation of People's Act 1950, RPA 1951. Then you have conduct of election rules. Now, within this, you have this rules 49O. So, under this, if any voter doesn't want to vote for any particular candidate because of several reasons, he or she has to get this form and then he can provide this in the form of this declaration. But the challenge with this was that this would be against the privacy of the voter, because here the election commission or the polling agent will be aware of which candidate or which voter has not opted to exercise the voting option or has opted for a nota option. So this was in a way was violating the right to privacy, and therefore Supreme Court had given this ruling in 2013 that there should be the nota option embedded in the EVM, so that there should not be any sort of problem in terms of filling a form and going through all the trouble, right? So this was what was declared. And in terms of the implementation, it was first implemented in the 2013 Legislative Assembly in several states such as Chhattisgarh, Mizoram, Rajasthan, and Madhya Pradesh, and even in Delhi, right? So these were the states where the nota option were given. Okay, so here what exactly is nota? Nota, citizens choose not to vote or choose to vote by not giving a vote to any political candidate. So this was the idea as a form of formal protest in terms of, if for example there are four candidates who are contesting election and against all four of them there are certain criminal charges levied against them, and you don't want to vote for any of them. So how do you register your protest this and not, especially by going to the election and not abandoning it by exercising the option of nota, right? So this was the intention behind this. So if you look at the intention, it was essentially for to give this signal that if in any constituency, if more nota votes are there, it would signal high dissatisfaction among the voters, and thereby it would also force the political parties to provide for an alternative set of candidates. At the same time, it was not without challenges. So the first thing was voters cannot exercise nota options in constituencies where a candidate is elected unopposed. Now, this is the heart of the debate that is ongoing, where the PIL was filed under Section 53, Clause 2 of the RPA. So when a candidate is only there is one candidate that is contesting election, in such cases nota is not applicable. There is no election that is held that single candidate is deemed to be elected, right? The second issue is it doesn't lead to any impact. For example, if there are two or three, if there are three candidates, 1, 2, and then 3, and then there is nota. Even if nota achieves say 99% votes, then also here the one which gets the maximum votes is stand elected as part of the candidate. So here, even if whatever percentage of votes or number of votes that nota gets, it doesn't create any sort of impact in terms of the final outcome of the election. The third one is that it is ineffective against criminality, as political parties has continued to select candidates based on the electability in terms of whether they can provide for funds or whether they have mass following, irrespective of the fact that whether they are morally correct or whether they have some deemed characteristic, right? All these things have not been taken into account. Now, what could be way forward? How do we make or reconcile this whole provision? So there are two approaches that can be followed. One of the approach is followed in Colombia, which is I think a very good one, because here there is a 50% plus one rule, and candidates ban. So what happens is under this election, re-elections happen if Nota gets 51% of the valid votes, right? So it will ensure that Nota has some teeth in it, right? Some importance. And the previous candidates which receive less than 51%, or if Nota gets 51%, then all the previous candidates' candidature has to be cancelled, right? So it's a very good initiative to reduce the criminalization of politics and to ensure that there is some sort of political accountability, right? The second one is state-led initiative. Now, you may be surprised to know that Nota is applicable only at the Lok Sabha level and at the state legislative assembly level. But at the same time, even in certain the local bodies election also, Nota option can be exercised if the state government initiates certain initiative or certain measures. So in this regard, the State Election Commission of two states, Maharashtra and Haryana, have taken certain steps where what they are using is they're treating Nota as a fictional candidate. So they think that Nota will be treated as a similar candidate, as a fictional candidate. And if they get a majority election, if Nota gets majority votes, then re-election will be conducted. So again, these two are the models that can perhaps be adopted at the central and at the state level to ensure that we are reconciling or we are strengthening the provision of Nota and thereby ensuring that election in India is free and fair. Next article is blockchain-based digital governance. Now, this topic is something that is at the intersection of governance and also science and technology. With respect to governance, we have a topic called e-governance, where you have these subtopics such as application, models, success, limitation, and potential. And UPSC frequently asks questions from e-governance in the mains. And then you also have GS paper 3 science technology, where you need to understand the basic working of all these technology. Maybe it is about AI, it is about cryptography, or it is about blockchain. You should understand what is the basic principle behind them. Okay. Now, why this is gathering so much importance is because there are several issues with respect to the present model of governance. One of the issues is that most of the data in our country is centralized in nature. Second is that there is very lack of transparency. So people do not know to what extent this is there, like there's no correctness or there's no one correct approach. Thirdly, it is also not distributed across the states. It is centralized, right? And it is prone to misuse. It is prone to fraud. All these challenges are there. And it is not just limited to, say, document verification. Data can be with respect to your land records, your medical records. It can impact your recruitment. It can impact your employment. So there are several ways in which a small piece of data or even a large piece of data can involve a large number of things, right? And using blockchain, a lot of these problems can be addressed. That is why recently, Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology and CDAC have launched this initiative called Blockchain India Challenge to encourage the Indian startups to pitch and pilot the cutting edge blockchain based digital governance. They want the startups to come out and tell what can be the application with respect to e-governance in the country, right? And to understand what is blockchain, so blockchain is a decentralized, right? So it's not centralized at one particular node, it is decentralized. So most of the users will have access to this ledger. So blockchain is in a very simple term, a ledger or register of accounts. And this account is not just limited to one person. So suppose there are several 10 persons who are involved in some financial transaction, right? So instead of keeping one central database, everyone will have access to that particular that particular block. And anytime any change is made, the change has to be reflected in all these databases, right? So that there is very little chances of manipulation, right? Also, so this is decentralized. It is distributed means that it is given to all the important stakeholders who are directly impacted. And then it is also a ledger, means that it is an online account or register kind of thing. And it ensures this is a tamper proof, so people cannot manipulate it as per their own whims and fancies. Transparent, there is transparency, people understand what changes have happened, so it is not that it is confined. And then it is auditable, so the token system or the link with whichever is edited, they can see what changes have happened. So this ensures that the record keeping is robust, it is transparent, it is tamper proof. Next, it operates on the principle of immutability, means that it cannot be changed unless everyone agrees on the change. It works on the principle of consensus. And cryptographic, it means that there's a requirement of a code without which changes cannot happen, and this code is generated every time some change is made, right? So it makes data manipulation virtually impossible, and this is the principle where cryptocurrency also works. So the underlying principle is blockchain, and cryptocurrency or cryptography is essentially one of the application of this. Next, what is the role of blockchain in governance? Now we understood that how the blockchain works is at this level. It can be applicable at several areas. It can be done for the certificate and document collection or document verification. So suppose there is a centralized depository where everyone can provide their class 10th mark sheet, class 12th mark sheet, right? So at this time, we are living in a time of AI, and it is very easy to manipulate those documents. So if the documents are there in one single area, or maybe it is distributed and it is there at several locations, then anytime any change is made, this change needs to be done at all the levels, otherwise the centralized one will be corrected, right? So this ensures that the fraudulent documentation can be overcome, and that is why NIC has developed certificate chain for secure storage and retrieval of records. For logistics purpose, Karnataka has started with Aushadaya system to track the medicine movement. So medicine are highly prone to misuse, and there is counter or fake medicines that have been going on. So that is why this initiative tracks the medicine movement from manufacturer to hospitals and ensuring the quality checks. In fact, patients can also verify manufacturer expiry and quality, so that even though the labeling can be removed or can be manipulated, they will have all the access of this data. Then judiciary also uses this in terms of interoperable criminal justice system. It integrates criminal justice ecosystem with respect to case records, when this case was filed, what is the evidence, are the evidence credible or not, what are the documents that suggest. So all the case management system will be present, that cannot be manipulated. Then in terms of property, now this is the area which is prone to highest misuse in India: land records, property records. Now if we have a blockchain powered property management system, it records all the property transactions, ownership, deeds, etc., and liabilities, reducing litigation and speeding dispute resolution. So this is a very effective way of doing all such issues. Then other than that, there are other application of blockchain in e-governance that includes proof of concepts being developed for remote voting, GST monitoring, blood banks, and the PDS, public distribution system. So if a question comes, discuss the application of blockchain in governance. These are the multiple areas that you can mention. Next, other key initiatives by government. So apart from this, this is a challenge or startup challenge that government has initiated. This is called this Blockchain India Challenge. So this is the recent thing. But apart from that, government has also taken up several other measures. First one is National Blockchain Framework, NBF, which was essentially developed in 2021 by MITI. It provides a unified architecture for deploying blockchain solutions for public service delivery. So largely a technical solution, and ensuring that the deployment is uniform. The architecture is uniform so that there is easy deployment of the architecture across different domains. Then it has several components like Vishwasya Stack, NBF Lite, and Pramalik. right? Then second, it has Center of Excellence in Blockchain Technology, established to offer blockchain as a service. Like we have software as a service, so there is also a concept of blockchain as a service, BaaS. So we are now moving from a time of SaaS to BaaS, right? Infrastructure for government departments. Next, we also have land records management system, where states like Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, and Maharashtra are using blockchain for land title registration. So these are some of the initiatives which have already been piloted and undertaken by the government, not just the central government, but also by the state government. PYQs from this has been in the realm of e-governance, but of course UPSC can also ask you about the application of blockchain in governance, because under the e-governance there's also a term called potential. So potential means the future use. So blockchain can be a potential area from where question can be asked. Next topic is UN launches road safety financing project in 4 states of India. So this topic would largely come under the urbanization topic of GS paper 1 society, right? Because we are seeing a very different form of urbanization in India, where it is uneven in nature, it is very much distressed in nature, and road accidents now and then has become a very common sight these days. So we need to understand what exactly are driving these uneven urbanization and what are some of the remedies for this. And then we also need to understand about the infrastructure which is there as part of GS paper 3. So what exactly has happened? So again, these are some details that you need to know as part of the prelims preparation. So what is the official name of this project? It is Sustainable Financing for Road Safety in India, a collaborative approach. So this is the official name, and funding is to be provided by UN Road Safety Fund. I'll tell you the details about this very shortly. Then what is the technical support? The technical support is to be provided by WHO, UNICEF, and UNESCAP. Okay. Then what are the 4 states which are involved? Rajasthan, Kerala, Tamil Nadu, and Assam. Now this can be a potential area of prelims question, that which 4 states are involved as part of the road safety program by UN. Then what are the focus area? Building national and subnational capacities for the effective implementation of road safety action plan. So essentially it is to build the national capacity, and the subnational means that it is not just at the level of state but also for the local governance, local bodies. See, the most important thing is on reducing road fatalities and serious injuries that lead to disabilities. Now, what is the current status of road safety scenario in India? First is that as close to 1.68 lakh fatalities were reported in 2022-2023 as per a ministry report of Ministry of Road Transport. Then majority of the victims, you can see that they are within 18 to 45 years of age, which basically means that they were in the age group of employment or education, right? And the largest share is two-wheelers, and the major cause, of course, is overspeeding. Then the impact of this is that it is not just a mental issue or it leads to the problems in family, but it also leads to a huge loss of finance as well, as India loses around 3% of GDP annually due to road clashes, which is a significant amount of economic loss. Right? So what are some of the initiatives which the government has undertaken to reduce road related cases in India? So first is Motor Vehicles Amendment Act 2019. Now it has enhanced the governance mechanism, accountability and penalties for traffic violation. In fact, there's also a provision where the citizens who are looking into or who are there when an accident happens, and they provide for some sort of comfort, and they take out the patients or the victim to a hospital. They are provided some monetary compensation, and this is part of Good Samaritan provision, which was initially there in Bangalore or Karnataka, but later it has been expanded and adopted by several states. Recently, Delhi has also adopted this particular measure, right? Then you have National Road Safety Strategy 2018 to 30. So it provides a framework target, a 50% reduction in road fatalities by 2030. Next, you have integrated road accident database. So the database will tell you which areas are accident prone and will tell you some of the important ways through which, like, there can be some dash cam and there can be some warning signals that could be provided, and better road design can be undertaken, more advisory could be provided, so that the traffic management can be done in a better way. For state support for strengthening road safety, a centrally sponsored 6-year program implemented in 14 high fertility states, backed by rupees 270 crore from the World Bank, ADB, and the Government of India. So apart from the UN support, we also have other initiatives as well. So let's talk about the UN Road Safety Fund that we were talking about earlier. So it was established in 2018 to mobilize financing for road safety in which countries? In low and the middle countries. So India will come under the middle income countries. Then it supports evidence-based policy, legislation, and capacity building projects. So under this, they are trying to build the capacity of national and sub-national governments. Next, it works with government, civil society, and private sector partners, which basically means that it is using the whole of government and whole of society approach. Next, other global effort is Declaration of Marrakesh, adopted at 4th Global Ministerial Conference on Road Safety, that is, where it was held in 2025, and calls for political commitment, sustainable financing, and safe system approach. The next news is on Supreme Court shifts river pollution monitoring to NGT. And this topic is part of GS paper 3 environment, or it can also be as part of GS paper 2. You may say judicial activism or judicial review, all these things, or constitutionalization of judicial cases. So largely this is from GS paper 3, but it can also come as part of indirectly as part of GS paper 2 as well. Now let us take a look at this, what has happened. So Supreme Court in 2011 had taken a very significant decision that it will be the Supreme Court that will be monitoring the environmental pollution of or river pollution of major rivers, right? And the year was 2011, but still, sorry, 2021. But 5 years since the decision was taken, not much has been done by the Supreme Court because it is burdened with several constitutional and important cases. That is why it has not been taking these cases as a matter of priority. And because of that, all these matters are languishing. So this is the first order effect. The second order effect is because of the Supreme Court intervention, the NGT, which is basically enabled or which is given this power to provide for the remedies, it has also not been able to function properly because the power to properly monitor and implement the rules related to the pollution has been overseen or has been taken up by the Supreme Court, right? So the Supreme Court has observed also that right to live in hygienic conditions with human dignity and clean environment, it forms part of right to life under Article 21 of the Constitution. This Supreme Court has said time and again, it has modified or it has expanded Article 21 like anything. But the problem is it being implemented in a effective manner or not? Now, this is the reason why Supreme Court has delegated now this power back to NGT because of its workload and because of the fact that Supreme Court is not able to provide for a targeted and technical expertise which NGT possesses. Now, what is the scenario or status of river pollution in India? There are a couple of points that you should know in terms of prelims, like what are the condition or what is the criteria for a river to be considered polluted. For this, we need to check the BOD, the biochemical oxygen demand. So whenever any river exceeds BOD of 3 milligram per liter, then that particular stretch of river is classified as polluted. So what is BOD? It is a key indicator of water quality, amount of dissolved oxygen needed by aerobic microorganism to break down organic matter in water over a specified period. So essentially it means that if there is some sort of pollution is there, then more amount of oxygen would be required for the aerobic microorganism to break down that component. So we also have COD, then there's BOD, all these things are there. Then what is the status? 296 river stretches were considered polluted on 271 rivers out of 645 rivers across 32 states and UTs. Highest is found in Maharashtra, that is 54. Then you also have, it includes Yamuna in Delhi, Sabarmati in Ahmedabad, Chambal in Madhya Pradesh, Tungabhadra in Karnataka, and Sarbanga in Tamil Nadu. So these are the major rivers where the pollution has been observed. Now let's talk about the environment or environment component of this. Like, what is the major source of river pollution? The major component is that the waste that is generated at various levels are dumped inside or in the river, considering that the rivers will clean itself or the things automatically. This used to be the case earlier, perhaps, but now that we are generating so much solid waste and types of waste, and we are not treating it and we are directly dumping it, it is causing the most, or in fact, according to the CPCB, it is creating more than 60% of the untreated sewage water is released into the river daily, and that is the major function, cause of river pollution. Not just the household sewage, but more importantly, the industrial waste which are released to river without treating them. It is also causing river pollution in a very major way. Then, especially from chemicals, sugar, paper, and tanneries, they generate a lot of wastewater. Then, municipal solid waste, agricultural runoff, sand mining, and illegal encroachment also create a huge havoc on the river water quality, right? So recently, Supreme Court has also given the direction that the solid waste rules or solid waste municipal management rules should be effectively implemented from 2026, April 2026, and it has given a huge way or guidelines on how the implementation needs to be undertaken. So once we have understand the reasons of pollution, then perhaps we can take more targeted approach. Now, what are the initiatives undertaken for cleaning and the rejuvenation of rivers by the government? What has been our approach? So, most of our approach has been based on cleaning specific sects of water. So, the one that is flagship one is National Ganga Program that was launched in 2014. In fact, before that also we had several projects that were there to clean River Ganga. So this basically consolidates everything that was there with respect to cleaning and rejuvenation of River Ganga. So here it includes wastewater treatment. So we have seen that one of the major reasons for pollution of river water is that the effluents from industries are treated or are sent to rivers without being treated. So first thing is that there will be wastewater treatment. Second, household waste also should be treated before providing or emitting it in river. So solid waste management should be done very effectively. Riverfront management, all these things will be done. Then the second one is Yamuna Action Plan 1993. It aims to clean the stretch of river Yamuna. Then we have National River Conservation Plan. It's a centrally sponsored scheme implemented for abatement of pollution in identified states, stretch of rivers in the country, excluding those in Ganga Basin. So, National River Conservation Plan doesn't include Ganga Basin, not just Ganga River, but Ganga Basin, right? Then technology used for pollution monitoring is LIDAR, and drone surveillance is also being used. So these are the interventions taken by the government to address river pollution. Next, there was a PYQ that came in I think in 2013 or something. So 2018, I guess. So this question was, how is the NGT different from CPCB, that is Central Pollution Control Board? Two statements. First is, the NGT has been established by an act. So NGT has been established by which act? NGT Act 2010. So this first half of the statement is correct. While CPCB is what? Central Pollution Control Board. It has been created by an executive order of the government. Now this is not a correct fact, because even this has been created by Water Act, I think. Water Act of 1974. So it was essentially to preserve or to conserve the water pollution, etc. So it is not an executive body, but it is also a statutory body. So statement one is wrong. Statement 2, the NGT provides environmental justice and helps reduce the burden of litigation in the higher court. So that was the reason why NGT was established in the first place. Apart from the technical expertise, it would reduce the burden on the higher courts. And third, it would also provide for more expertise. Whereas the CPCB promotes cleanliness of streams and wells and aims to improve the quality of air in the country. So first it was created under Water Act, but its mandate were later changed or expanded to also take into account the air pollution as well. So this is correct. So the right answer is 2 only. In fact, NGT has mandate over a lot of areas except Wildlife Prevention Act of 1972, also or on Indian Forest, etc., acts, etc. And the reason is very simple: is that NGT is essentially a civil court, right? It doesn't look into the criminal aspects, and in the WPA, most of the offences which are there for the scheduled animals are criminal in nature. That is why WPA is something which is outside the mandate of NGT. I hope this is clear. Next news is Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory, LIGO India. This is to be established, set up in India. A very big news with respect to science and especially physics news. And this is definitely a topic from GS paper 3, Science and Technology. So this deal has been given. So Larsen and Toubro, a very important, a very famous company, has won the deal from India's Department of Atomic Energy to build a LIGO at Hingoli district in Maharashtra. So now they are going to build a LIGO observatory, which is very important observatory to observe the gravitational wave interactions, right? So we'll understand what exactly is LIGO. So it is an interferometer based observatory. So generally observatory is a setup that is observing various phenomena, and here it means that it is going to observe various space phenomena. Now space phenomena can be observed via telescope, it can be observed via electromagnetic radiation, etc. And this is about interferometer, which means that essentially when two major or some major interaction happens at the level of at the universe level through the interaction of through black holes colliding or something, then the waves that is generated because of that interaction is essentially measured by these observatory. It is designed to detect gravitational waves. What are gravitational waves? They are ripples in space time created by some of the most violent and energetic processes like the neutron stars or black holes colliding or orbiting each other in the universe. These cosmic ripples would then travel at the speed of light, carrying with them information about their origins. So, this will help us understand more about the origin of the universe, about some of the important development that is happening across the universe, about the location of the black holes, because as such we cannot observe black holes through telescope or any sophisticated telescope, because in black holes, as we all know, that even light cannot escape because of the high gravity that is present at the black hole, right? As well as cues to the nature or the gravity itself. So this can help us understand more about gravity, how does it work, where is it functioning, and the ways in which the theory of relativity and all these things will be functioning. So all of them will essentially come across as major theoretical aspects, but again we do not know to what extent these theoretical aspects could be translated into real life application. Next, what is the principle? The principle exploits the physical properties of light and of space itself to detect and understand the origins of gravitational waves. And I'll show you how it works very simply. So this is the laser. So for example, let me give you a very simple demonstration illustration. So this is the laser. Laser will emit this sort of light, and within this there will be a beam splitter. It will split the beam, and it will have two ways in which it will be seen, like here and here. There will be two mirrors that will be placed, and as a result of this, it will be split into two factions, right? So this is how these two, from here it will come, it will split here, and the waves will travel from here to here and then from here to here. And they are placed at similar distance so that the waves generated, for example, 1 would be like this, and the waves generated for 2 will also be like this. So in a way, what it will do is it will cancel out any sort of differences, right? Because there's no difference at all. So when they interfere, when they interact, there is no net wave that is generated, right? So this is the functioning. Now what would happen is, if there is some sort of gravitational wave that is present, this will change the wavelength of the light that is here. It will have some sort of interference in this, and this will now will lead to changes in this, right? So now there will be some changes here. So this is how the interferometer will be working, by seeing that if there is a gravitational wave generated somewhere far there in the universe, it will be observed through this interferometer. So this is how it will work. You can see this is a laser beam splitter, and then this is the detector. This will be detecting it and seeing that if there is a gravitational wave present or not. If it detects gravitational wave, what it indicates is that something major is happening over the universe, right? So this is the functioning of the LIGO. Now, what about LIGO India? It is approved by, the project has been approved by government 10 years back in 2016, and it is part of the worldwide network of gravitational wave observatory to further enhance the knowledge about gravitational waves, first detected at LIGO USA in 2015. It is developed by Department of Atomic Energy and Department of Science and Technology in collaboration with National Science Foundation in US. So it can also be considered as one of the key dimension of India-US technological partnership, right? Then we have institutes from India which are part of this, and other gravitational wave observatory is there in US, in Italy, in Japan, etc. What is the significance for LIGO in India? The significance is in development of astrophysical research leadership. It will lead to technological advancement, industry collaboration, as this is largely done by Larsen and Toubro, international prestige, and also in diplomacy, where India is collaborating with a host of other countries in this. Let's quickly go for the quick updates part. First news is Sujvika. So this is the 40th foundation day of the Department of Biotechnology, which was founded in 1986, right? So what is Sujvika? In very simple terms, what it will do is, it's an AI platform or AI system that will detect or it will analyze all the imports or all the trade that India is doing with other countries in terms of biotechnology. And based on this data, it will identify those areas where we need to use it for indigenization purpose. Okay, so in a way, it will take data from various trade that we are conducting with different countries, and then what it will do is it will map it out in certain actionable terms, and this will help in the indigenization of an R&D projects, right? So it's a very essential tool. Second is about peatlands. And what is important here is that there are a couple of lakes in DRC, that is Democratic Republic of Congo. Lake Mai, Dombe, and Tumba of DRC are releasing the carbons that have been locked away for thousands of years in surrounding peatlands, right? So what are peatlands? Peatland is an area of land with layers of accumulated organic surface material in a state of decay, right? And they are very essential because they contribute to at least 5% of global greenhouse gas emission, and also contribute to climate change. And this particular swamp, it, in terms of area, it is only 0.3% of the Earth's land surface, yet it contributes 1/3. So this data is very significant, that it holds 1/3 of the carbon stored in the tropical peatlands, right? So in terms of the exam, we should understand the location where this has this lakes are located. So they are located in DRC. Some data, we should understand what peatlands are. That is more than sufficient. Next is a scheme called RAMP, which is Rising and Accelerating MSME Performance. Now, this is the National MSME Council has reviewed the progress of the scheme, but essentially what it means is that see, it was launched in 2022. Again, it is supported by World Bank, and it is implemented by Ministry of MSME, 5-year period. So this is why it is being reviewed. And the objective is what? To scale up the implementation capacity and coverage of MSME. Largely how? Through providing them credit, through increasing their capacity, all these aspects, right? So fostering innovation, ideation, all these aspects will be part of this RAMP initiative. Next, military exercises which are in news. Two military exercises which have recently been done. One is exercise Dharma Guardian. Now, this is the military exercise between the Indian Army and Japan Ground Self Defense Force, right? So, this is first we should understand why military exercises happen. This is to ensure that there is some sort of interoperability. It is also part of defense diplomacy. It also signals to the adversary that these countries are united in an endeavor, right? So this becomes highly important, especially from the perspective of the Indian Army, because we understand some of the important ways in which other armies work. It helps in joint training. It helps in better utilization of resources, all these aspects, especially since India and Japan has already signed the acquisition control and supply chain management ACSA agreement, right? Then with USA, we had exercise Vajra Prahar. This exercise aims to enhance the military cooperation between India and US. Now, again, very important exercise. Now, also understand that these military exercises can either be bilateral exercise or it can be multilateral exercise. For example, Malabar exercise is a multilateral exercise. Okay. Article 3 of the Constitution, this has recently been invoked because the Kerala government or the Kerala Legislative Assembly has passed a resolution to name itself as Keralam. Okay. Now, there's a specific way where the name of a state is changed. In fact, the last time when the name of a state was changed was when Odisha, Orissa changed its name to Odisha from R to D, right? So this happened in 2011, and there's a constitutional provision for that, and this constitutional provision is Article 3. So we should know what is the power of what is there as part of Article 3. So it empowers the Parliament to do three things. One, form new state, then increase, diminish, or alter the boundary of a state, then to change the name of a state. So these three are the powers that are given to Parliament and not to the state. Now, what is the process? So it can either be under the initiation of the center or at the initiation of state. So when a state initiates the process, a resolution is first passed at the level of the state legislature. Then that process is given to the cabinet, and the cabinet then provides a resolution, and then president recommends, and then it is again sent back to the state legislation, and then it is passed by a simple majority. When the union would want to change the name, then it will directly start from the president recommending it, and then the move will go to the concerned state government, and their approval will be sought. But the president is not bound to decide on the basis, or it's the decision which is whatever is done by the state legislature is not binding on the president. Fishing cat. So there was a first scientific assessment for fishing cat was done, and it was established that Kaziranga National Park is a stronghold of the fishing cat. So we should understand what exactly is fishing cat. It's a powerful cat or a feline, about twice the size of the normal household cat that we see. And what are the habitats? They are generally found in the wetlands, mangroves, and in India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Thailand, etc. And what are their diets? They are nocturnal hunters, so they are largely operational during night. And they prey on fish, frogs, crustaceans, snakes, birds, scavenge carcasses. So as you can see from this image there, this cat is eating, I think, fish, I guess, right? So what is the conservation status? It is under the IUCN Red List, it is vulnerable. Then 1972 WPA, it is state scheduled 1 and cites appendix 2, and it is considered as a state animal of West Bengal as well. Next, Employee State Insurance Corporation. This was in news because it recently celebrated its 75th year of formation. So we should know about the origin. It's a statutory body, a social security body established in which year? 1952. Under which act? Employees State Insurance Act in 1948, under Ministry of Labor and Employment. So initially it provided comprehensive social security and health insurance to the employees from the organized sector, but recently its mandate has increased and now even unorganized sectors can be part of this following the changes in the labor codes. Okay. Next is Prevention of Money Laundering Act 2002, where the Delhi High Court has made a very important judgment, where it has said that even the ancestral property can be seized by ED when in the case of PMLA. So this is why it is being in news, because under the provisions of PMLA, generally the proceeds of crime can be taken up by the enforcement directorate. Okay, so this is a very important development in undertaking or curbing the menace of money laundering. So this is all about today's news. I hope this was productive for you. Let me know how it went for you. Thank you and all the best.